Hi, me again. This is our second installment in this little painting of Pathway to the Beach, and let's get it started. We are looking down at our palette at this point. We have a little green, a little yellow ochre, a little burnt sienna, black. We have some violet, blue, two little touches of white. We are not putting out a lot of paint. You can always put out more paint if you need more paint. However, you can't put it back in the tubes, hard to save. This is our source material that we're looking at up here. We'll be working in two ways, juggling two things. We'll be working from background to foreground, and we'll be working from dark to light in as long as that seems reasonable to do so. Sometimes one has to be sacrificed for the other, so that's our plan, our working plan. Back to the palette. We're going to work underneath some of our foliage initially, and for that we're going to use a little green. We're not pre-mixing. We're working in the vein of Monet, so we're not pre-mixing on the palette. We're just kind of feeling around on the palette for something that we would like. So little green, little violet, and then we'll run into the painting with that underneath the foliage. So we have a rather deep green. I'm going back into purples and greens here. I want something that's dark and cool. Still working with purple and green. Working with the largest brush that we have at our disposal, and I'm going to work throughout this foliage with a little of it, but I'm always going to be trying to work on the underside of this foliage. Light is coming in from the top here, so we're working underneath it with purples and greens. In acrylic painting and in oil painting, you work from dark to light. The lights are laying on top of the painting. Acrylic's a very opaque medium. On a damp brush, not a wet brush, just damp. Acrylic's a very opaque medium, so that when we start laying lights in, it'll go right over the top of this, no problem. It's got a lot of kind of cools in here at this point, laying underneath the foliage. Green purple. Let's take it on up into this just a little bit. Right, rinsing the brush. We're working with the largest brush we have because that's the most efficient thing you can do. Camera quit on me last time before I realized I hadn't realized the camera was off, and I painted in the water in the background. I'll kind of simulate that for you right now, but it was absolutely pure blue. We just painted it in, and I took it all the way across the horizon line, so if indeed we sort of started peeking through up here, we'd still have it. So if we peeked through the foliage, we'd be able to see the blue ocean back in behind it. So that was a pretty straightforward, easy thing to do there. Let's run back down to the palette here for a moment. We are continuing to work from dark to light, so we have some areas underneath this foliage up here. We're going to go ahead and put in some of the branches and the tree trunks, things like that. Most people will go to a point for that, so I'll go to a point brush for that. And we're going to use some burnt sienna and black here's something that I want you to keep in mind. Burnt sienna is an earth orange, and it grays and warms blue, green, violet, black, all of the cool colors. Black is a cool color, meaning that it has a cold feeling to it. It's just a psychological association we make with color. So we're warming up this black a little with burnt sienna, and now we're going into the painting once again with that combination, and we're putting in some of the tree trunks. Need a damp brush, doesn't need to be sopping wet, okay, but damp enough so that you'll get some lines out of it. And I'm not working through all the foliage, and you can have more or less branches that I'm putting in here. You know, it wouldn't make that much difference, I don't think. A few more little stands of these trees in here. You know, that's probably good enough. As I said, you know, if you wanted to see more, you could put more in. With these live oaks on the coast, they get to be pretty curvilinear. So, you know, we're not looking for hard straight lines. We're looking for pretty much curvilinear lines as they go in and, you know, hold the foliage together. That's probably enough of that, I think. I'm going to drop down into back up here so I can show you what I'm working with. I'm going to drop in to some of this greenery, some of the low-lying foliage grassy areas in this little painting that are, you know, kind of climbing this bank and moving underneath the trees over there. Variety is going to be the key here, so let's run back down to the palette for a moment. We're looking for some greens. This yellow ochre is going to be good for warming up that green some, so it'll get much warmer. A little bit of white will give you some opaqueness to this. And we want to begin to use our brush strokes moving back and forth now, because that will lay it down better. In other words, don't stand these brush marks up. We want to move in this direction at this point. So we're going back and forth, back and forth. We're back into green and yellow ochre here. And since we're not mixing on the palette, we're mixing on the brush, you should pretty naturally come up with some variety in, you know, how this looks in terms of, you know, it being darker, lighter, warmer, cooler, and that'll be the key to this being successful in this area, is that, you know, as long as it's getting some variety in it, and we're moving back and forth, back and forth, and the strokes moving more or less in a direction that's parallel to the bottom and top of the picture plane. Same combination over here for now. Back and forth, back and forth. We need to fill in some of these areas in between the branches here. Let's make a few shifts in our green. Go back down to the palette for a moment. And we'll begin to feel around on the palette for something that is a little cooler in this area. We can use a little white in this combination, perhaps a little purple and back to green. And we'll have something that is another tone of that green, but it's going to be maybe a little cooler in here. So let's take a look at that, see what kind of effect that has in the painting here. Kind of nice, yes. White is also generally cool, so when it's added to a color, it will cool it down a bit. It's going to give us a good bit of variety in the bank here of grass. Still going between purple, green, and white. So that's what I have on this brush. It's kind of easy on the purple side, but we're getting some cooler greens in this area at this point. Let's run back down to the palette for this. We're just kind of basically laying in things broadly at this point. We'll have an opportunity to go back in and clean things up a little, do some refinement later. We're now going to go into the foliage. Let me dip up here before we go back to the palette. Let's see. We're going to go into some of this foliage now. Alright, now we can use, as I showed you earlier, we can use a little burnt sienna and green for something that's even a little deeper than what we have already in this painting in the areas that are more or less underneath foliage, and this will take it down one more step. So we'll take a few areas down one more step with the burnt sienna and green, which will really push that green down to something that is still green, but almost a black, really. You can overpaint this stuff a little, won't make any difference because, as I said earlier, acrylic is an opaque medium, so the lights will go right over the top of this, no problem. I've got 2 or 3 different kinds of greens in here at this point. And while we have this on the brush, this green and burnt sienna combination, let's put a line or 2 of it here in our grassy areas, just for some variety in there, more and more variety. It's key to a landscape is to have a great deal of variety in it. So we got burnt sienna green is what we're using here. We're getting more variety in our grassy areas here. Still working in the area, we're going to drop back up into the area of the trees and the foliage. Let's get back down to the palette for just a moment. Now we need something warmer, lighter. So we'll continue to use this combination of green and yellow ochre over here. Touch of white. The white's going to make it very opaque. And we want this yellow ochre to stay over there on the green side. And as we go into the painting, we're going to go into the tops of the foliage. So we're dealing with them as if they were kind of three-dimensional clumps of foliage. That's all we're interested in. So we're working into tops of the foliage now. And that'll give you this fullness of the three-dimensionality of the clumps of the foliage as the light hits the tops of them. Really have enough white in that. And we're treating everything as if it's basically just kind of one big large shape. We're not painting in individual leaves because, you know, we don't have all day long to do that. And so we're treating the foliage as if it were kind of large clumps of foliage. And just lighten some of it back up here. We can go a little lighter up here. Too much yellow ochre in that. And then we kind of got this I think directional, nice compositional direction going that's sort of pointing the viewer back down towards the pathway as well. So it's down, down, down. We'll go over here to foliage on the opposite side. And I'm still using the largest brush that, you know, I think it's reasonable to handle here. And still in this combination of green, yellow ochre, and a little bit of white. Don't kill all of the darker areas that you put in earlier. I'm painting somewhat to avoid them. Back over here a little bit. It's a little bit too regular for me. I'm going to break that up some. Alright, let's drop into this pathway at this point rather than just leave it white like that. And this is a simple combination. It's just going to be burnt sienna and white. And burnt sienna and white will together give you automatically this kind of pinkish sandy look, which is what we're looking for here. And we're going to use our strokes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth as we move along that pathway. Get a little variety in it. Doesn't need to be all one tint. can shift a little from lights to darks, and loading the brush on the palette, you'll automatically get some of that shifting whether you like it or not. While we have this mixed up here on the palette, and we're in here in the painting in the pathway, white, burnt sienna, solaces, and we painted in the pathway back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Let's take it into the grassy areas, just to give some impression that, maybe there's some bare spots in here, and perhaps a little bit of the sandy areas begin to figure into those areas as well. So let's drop it in there a place or two. Okay. I'm taking a look now at some of this foliage. I believe that I'm going to deepen it some, a little bit more. Deeper greens, and I'm going to use burnt sienna in my green for that. So I'd like to see some additional darker areas in here, so I think it'll make it more dramatic. Paint pretty quickly, I suppose, but moving the brush around a lot with a bit of a irregular thing, like you've had too much coffee or something like that, is pretty helpful in a landscape, especially in foliage. So that kind of jiggle that you give the brush sometimes is really advantageous in here. Let's go back over here to this area and give it a few more darks as well. I think I stayed a little bit too light on this, and I would like to see a little more contrast between these trees and all of this light sky space in the background.